and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome everyone to this very special episode of Irreverent. I'm joined today by David Kurten, the leader of the Heritage Party. You're the founder as well, are you, David, of the Heritage Party?
I am. I started it in 2020 and there was me and then there were three people. We got through all the process and now there's hundreds of us. So
fantastic.
I did start it 5 years ago.
Oh, well done. Very good. And just for people who've not heard of you, who listen to the show, just tell us who you are, a bit about your background and a bit about the Heritage Party, if you will.
Yeah, sure. Well, my first job was as a teacher, but then I got actively involved in politics about 10 years ago. Yeah. I started with UKIP and I was elected onto the London Assembly in 2016 because I was advocating for Brexit. And I was on the London Assembly for 5 years until 2021. I ran for the London mayor at that time, but I didn't get in, unfortunately. And by that time, UKIP had pretty much collapsed. So I was independent for a little bit. And then I started the Heritage Party in 2020 because I thought the UK really needs a properly socially conservative party that's not just for national sovereignty and financial responsibility and all those things, but is for low immigration and for what you might call Christian principles, but are socially conservative principles, traditional marriage, traditional family values. We're pro-life as well. And all of those good things, because there wasn't anyone representing those principles in the big parties that are in Parliament. So we're a challenger to that. And now that's been going 5 years. I was very active in the freedom movement when there were lockdowns and coerced and forced injections of people, which I totally disagreed with. And now we're coming up to our fifth cycle of elections this year. So I love being here and doing what I'm doing and being the leader of the Heritage Party at the moment.
Yeah, fantastic. And just interested to ask, and actually a listener asked this question when I was fielding questions, but when you're coming from, you say a socially conservative position, but you're also quite clearly coming from a Christian position as well. You're advocating for what you might call just straightforwardly sort of Christian policies. How does that go down in a kind of secularized nation? I mean, you had a famous exchange with Ian Dale on LBC recently, didn't you? And just in general, how does that go down with folks who aren't Christians, or who are for whom the Christian worldview is just completely alien and foreign?
Well, I mean, that was quite something. I mean, just to talk about that interview with Ian Dale, where he was asking me about what I would do about LGBT policies and would I actually scrap gay adoption? I said, yeah, of course I would, because it's not right that children are placed without a mother and a father deliberately. And he really couldn't handle that at all. Yeah. And what you didn't see, I mean, he was very hostile in the interview and said, I'm going to cut you off. And if you don't shut up, I'm going to throw you out of the studio. Really, really hostile. But at the end of the interview, the moment the cameras went off, instead of like turning to everybody and saying thank you for coming in, shaking everyone's hand, he looked straight at me. I'm not going to swear here, but I'll just mouth the words. He said, you're a bigot, aren't you? You're never coming on this show again.
Gosh.
And people didn't see that. If I wasn't as big a guy as I am, I thought he might come over and punch me, but that's the reaction you get from some people. They just simply can't tolerate the opposite position. They all talk about tolerance and diversity and something, all these things. But when you actually advocate for Christian principles, socially conservative principles, they can't handle it at all.
Yeah.
And with the Heritage Party, it's been bittersweet, because there's a lot of people who love what we stand for. I think a majority in the country actually still believe in traditional family values and are pro-life and have these Christian principles they believe in. But there are some people who say, well, I don't like that one thing. You're against gay marriage, so I'm not going to join you, or you're pro-life, so I'm not going to join you. I don't understand that. Why people don't want to get involved because we're pro-life. I mean, surely that's a good thing, but you get this, and it's disappointing that some people will say, I like everything, but this one thing stops me. And what are they going to do? Are they going to go and join Labour or join the Tories? I mean, what's the alternative? But I think I've had a lot of people saying, why don't you just scrap that one thing, or just scrap those one or two things and you'll get more people joining you. But the whole point of the Heritage Party is to be socially conservative and to advocate for these Christian principles, without being a specifically Christian party. And I say, no, I'm going to stand up for these, and we're going to lead on this and fight for these things, because to truly restore our nation, we need to get back to Christian foundations. Otherwise, we're just going to be blowing with the wind and descending into chaos forevermore.
Yeah, I suppose the what a lot of Christians think is, well, what we have to do is we have to go with a party that it has some chance of actually getting into power, and that and in some way represents something at least better than Labour or the Conservatives. And in the most recent election, I think for many people that was the Reform Party. Of course, looking at the policies and the values that Reform represent, they're not specifically Christian, and there would be many things where they would just be sort of socially liberal, but because they're better than the Uni Party, the Tories and Labour, lots of Christians and people who are minded in that way would have voted for them anyway. So there's a sort of pragmatism and a compromise there, isn't it? Whereas what you're actually saying is, no, we can't compromise. We have to actually stand up for what we believe in and advocate for it and vote for it. So that's the challenge, isn't it? Convincing people that, it's not about pragmatism and compromise. It's actually about standing up for those values. Is that the way you'd put it? And also, can I ask you, what do you think of Reform and what they're doing?
Yeah, I get asked a lot about Reform. People comment on that a lot. And, I don't go out of my way to comment on them, because they're doing what they're doing and I'm doing what I'm doing with the Heritage Party. And we're not the same. Yeah. There are some things that we do agree on. I think a lot of that is because the Heritage Party had a manifesto from the very beginning, which put all of these things out, but not just the socially conservative principles. No, we had an energy policy, a transport policy, a national sovereignty policy, a military policy, all of these things. But they never had a proper manifesto really until the general election campaign in June 2024. And when I looked at their manifesto, almost all of the things that were in there were things that they copied from us. Right. It was like half of what we stand for, copied and pasted, and maybe the sentences jigged around, but without these really important socially conservative principles, because they actually do describe themselves as a classic liberal party or a libertarian party. So they're not going to, agree with Christian principles. I mean, you saw that in the vote on what's called the assisting dying bill, or what is it, the real name is the end of life terminally ill patients bill or something. Yeah. And the majority of Reform MPs voted for that. They voted for euthanasia. Yeah. So it's a very bad compromise to say, well, I'm going to vote for them just because there's nothing better, because there is something better. There is the Heritage Party that stands for all of these things that you would want if you're a Christian and you want Christian principles restored to the nation. So, I mean, what my appeal to everyone is please come and join us, because we stood 41 candidates. We didn't have full coverage because, you do have this, what you said. Some people are going, oh, well, look, they've got more publicity. Yeah, they're a publicity machine. We're not at the moment, we're smaller in terms of people and we're smaller in terms of the available finances, but I need people to come and join me. So please, if you do want all of these things, don't compromise. Does the Bible tell you to compromise? No, it says don't compromise. You got to go for the kingdom of God in full. Don't compromise with the devil ever. So come and join me in the Heritage Party as a member, and stand as a candidate if you can, because we want full coverage of all the constituencies next time, and all the local council seats when those elections come up on a local basis as well. And then we can get what we want without compromising, because if you do, you're going to get some things that you don't want, which you find abhorrent. So please do the right thing.
Yeah, indeed. And there are a couple of bills that are coming through at the moment, which I wanted to ask you about in a minute. But just in a more general sense, the other thing that I think a lot of people believe, but also a lot of Christians believe, is that there's something sort of inherently wrong with imposing Christian morality upon a secularized culture or a multicultural society that doesn't believe in Christianity. How do you respond to that notion that religion / Christianity has no place in the political sphere?
Well, I totally disagree. I mean, Alistair Campbell said back in the 90s, didn't he, in the Blair administration, we don't do God. But
Yeah.
if you remove God from politics and from society, you're going to get all kinds of degeneracy, and you can see that. We're seeing the fruits of Christians in particular abdicating the public sphere now because you have LGBT everywhere, you have grooming gangs all over the place, you have crime going through the roof. Our kids are being indoctrinated in schools with all kinds of Marxist ideology. So if you don't get involved at the very root of this in politics, then you are basically allowing everything that is anti-Christian to come in. So yeah, I totally disagree with that. I think we need to get involved. It's not for everybody to be actively involved in becoming a politician, if you like, but we need people to do that in every sphere. We need people to be politicians, to be media presenters, to be judges, to be business leaders, to be musicians, to be artists. If you say, oh, well, Christians shouldn't be musicians, I mean, people would think, well, that's ridiculous, isn't it? Of course, there's nothing wrong with a Christian being a musician. There's nothing wrong with a Christian being a politician. And to be honest with you, I mean, England in particular, I mean, not the United Kingdom sort of by extension, but England has a Christian constitution with the Bill of Rights and the Act of Settlement from 1689, where the monarch is the head of state and the monarch swears an oath, a coronation oath, to uphold the laws of God and is the head of the Church of England. So by very definition, we are still a Christian country, and the constitution requires that the monarch upholds the laws of God, and the MPs, they swear an oath to the monarch who's sworn an oath to God. So by extension, the MPs should also be upholding the laws of God in this country. That's the fundamental identity of England, and obviously by extension the rest of the UK as well. So that's there. So this is a Christian country, and it's just waiting for Christians to get involved and doing what our nation requires of us.
Yeah, and I think also just to add to that, the sort of quietism angle, or whatever you want to call it, the sort of secular view of politics, the separation between religion and or between public and private life, and putting religion in the private sphere. You can see what's going on, with the assisted dying bill, for example. Is it illegitimate to say we don't want this because we are, not just because we are Christians, but because we believe that the Christian worldview is true, and because this is fundamentally evil. It's against the law of God to kill people. We should be showing compassion to people. We should be caring for the dying and not killing them. And if we depart from what God has revealed to us as what he wants, what is wise, and so on and so forth, we're going to incur disaster. It seems to me to be an obvious position, and it would seem to be a very strange thing from a Christian perspective to say, well, I think that assisted dying is really bad. I think it's really wrong. And from my Christian perspective, I would not want to see it happen, but I can't impose my Christian morality on the society. It seems to me to be a very strange sort of contradictory position, if you like.
Well, the thing is, secularism is not neutral. I mean, there's this idea put around that secularism is a tabula rasa with nothing on it. There's no values or principles on it, and it's for everybody to just build on that blank slate. But that isn't true, because secularism has its own values and is very much tied in with humanism, and also tied in with the evolution and materialism, and the idea that humans have got no intrinsic value. No, well, they do, but there's no intrinsic good and evil there. It's just up to everybody to decide to do what they see fit. And if someone take the euthanasia example, is like, well, if you feel this is right, or someone is not valuable anymore, you can just bump them off. Which is horrendous. But I would argue from both perspectives. I mean, from a Christian perspective, it's wrong, because you don't kill someone, and we've had this protection in law since the Offences Against the Person Act in 1871. 1861, that you cannot help someone to commit suicide because that is, it's essentially the same as murder, aiding and abetting murder. So you don't do it. But this is all now being pulled apart. And, obviously that 1861 was a different time. This was a profoundly Christian country with Christian principles. So you got these kind of protections put in law. Now secularism has risen to such a point that this is all being pulled apart. And then people are putting the argument there's, oh, well, we're in a different time. This is not a Christian country anymore. We need to change things. We need to care about people. And it's always being presented in caring for people who are suffering. Well, you're killing them. So, I'm not sure where that, where that argument comes from. But, from a purely secular perspective, you can also argue that this allows state-sanctioned murder. And you can see where it's been introduced. Canada, the Netherlands and Belgium, immediately the remit of euthanasia expands well beyond what it's being presented to you as, just alleviating suffering for the terminally ill, to teenagers being killed by the state because they're a little bit depressed. And then in Canada, they even suggest that you kill yourself if you are, you have a mental illness, whatever that might be, or even if you are, depressed because you've lost your job and things like that. So that's where this is going. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. And it really devalues human life. I mean, even people who aren't Christian can see that and do have concerns about this. So, but I think if you're Christian, you really need to get in there and become the MPs, because if we are, then this kind of thing is not going to be presented. It's not even going to come forward as a bill. But because we quite, en masse abdicated, and then I haven't, and there are some good people who are still in there. But if you say I'm not going to get involved in politics, and this is the kind of thing that is going to come at you more and more, it's going to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that the thing with the euthanasia thing is that ultimately, I think it may wake quite a lot of people up, because I think people will realize that this isn't about some kind of pragmatic conversation over, ending the suffering of somebody who's at the end of their life. This is about these are about fundamental values, what we think human beings are, whether human beings have some kind of intrinsic purpose, some kind of intrinsic dignity, or whether, as you say, we're just, a sack of chemicals, and, the only thing that makes our life worth living is if we're having a good time or not. So I think it's fundamentally about those values. And I wonder whether this will actually wake people up to the reality of the ideological or philosophical view that is actually underpinning something like the assisted dying bill, or whatever it's called, assisted suicide bill.
I mean, in a sense, it's almost like Marxism in a way, that always rears its ugly head in all of these things, because in the Communist Manifesto and even Das Kapital as well, human beings are just seen as economic units of productivity. If you're not economically productive, then you have no worth and no value whatsoever. So when you come to the end of your life and you're not making anything or producing anything, or you're not contributing to the economy, then you're a drain on the economy and resources. So the right thing to do is just bump you off. I mean, that's the logical conclusion of Marxist thinking. So, and it's horrendous. It's anti-Christian, and we need to stand against these things. And so, otherwise, Marxism, secular humanism is going to run amok.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of this, David, a couple of things that I specifically want to ask you about. So the first one, so there's a couple of bills basically. So the first one is the so-called Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Both of these things we're going to talk about, I think they're not as well. This one's probably more well known, but both of them are not really as well known about as they should be. And I think also Christians need to be informed about these things. So can you tell us a little bit about the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill? What actually is this bill, and what specifically your concerns about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very perversely named, isn't it? Talking about children's well-being, when actually it's going to undermine children's well-being. Because the whole point of this is to undermine the relationship between parents and children. And the understanding we have is that parents are the primary educators and carers of the children and have rights over what happens to their children. So this is really a big power grab by the state to say, no, the state has the primary say as to what happens to your children. So there's a lot of things in there which are very concerning to me. One is this move to diversify the curriculum. And we've already got, schools becoming essentially indoctrination centers for LGBT, different family styles, transgenderism, climate alarmism, attacks on British culture, what they call white culture and whiteness, which is, even though this is a majority white country, and all of these kind of cultural Marxist ideologies, there's diversity, equality, and inclusion agenda. I mean, there's a whole diversity calendar now that's published by many of the school unions, which has like different days and weeks and months to celebrate LGBT, celebrate feminism, celebrate every different part of the world apart from our own. And the Labour are now wanting to establish this and all across the curriculum even more and write it in to the national curriculum. I mean, you already have these 3 subjects in school, which I think should be abolished, which is PHSE, was it personal social health education, citizenship, and comprehensive sexuality education, which is sometimes called relationships and sex education, whereby they are presenting to children all kinds of things which are wrong, political, and disgusting, sexually disgusting materials to kids, going into primary schools. And the Labour government want more of this, not just in those 3 subjects, but in the national curriculum everywhere. So, this is very, very concerning. I mean, the national curriculum is a relatively new invention. I mean, it did come in 1988 and has been added to and politicized by every single government that we've had, particularly under Blair and Brown, and now, under the Tories, their 14 years that they had. Cameron, May, etc. There's more diversity gone in, and now obviously Labour with Starmer is trying to, make it even more diverse as to what they see. So that's one thing. Another thing that very greatly concerns me is that this is a big attack on home education. There's a lot of people are now taking their children out of school and home educating them because they realise a lot of state schools are just dreadful. I mean, there are some good teachers in there. I was a teacher for a long time. It's not an easy job. And there are some good schools, but there are a lot of very bad schools that they just want to indoctrinate your kids, and they have activists now becoming teachers or starting up education companies and touring around schools and teaching children about transgender stuff. And they actually believe, and they measure their success by how many children they can get asking questions about whether they are actually a boy or a girl and whether they want to transition. And you've got these people in schools. And so parents are taking their children out of schools so that they don't get exposed to this kind of thing. And now what Labour wants to do is set up a register of home education, of home, children who are home educated. And the details that you're going to have to put on the register are so erroneous that it's going to be very, very difficult to comply with the requirements, because, you don't just have to tell the local council, oh yeah, my child, his name's Peter, he's being home educated. You have to say who all the tutors are, how much time they spend with them, what websites they're on, what courses they go to, what groups they attend, do they go to sports club, do they go to language club, all of these things. They've got to write a whole list of everything that's done in their home education, whereas before there's never been any requirement to tell anyone any of this. You just get on with it and you're trusted as a parent to do the right thing. Now they want to surveil everything and monitor everything that's happening. And if as someone from the local council will have the right to inspect your home education that they're doing and write a report, and if they deem that they think that it's not satisfactory, then they can put in a school attendance order and force children to go back into schools out of home education. So this really is an attack on home education, and they don't want a single child to come out of the system where they won't be indoctrinated by all of this cultural Marxism. That's the whole purpose of this. So it really is a cultural Marxist power grab against the rights of parents to bring up their children children as they want to do.
I mean, it's very concerning. I have 4 children, and we home educate them. They've never been in school, so it's very concerning for people like us and many other people as well. So a couple of questions, I suppose. Can anything be done about this at this stage? And what is there any hope that? Is there any hope here that this won't be as bad as it maybe looks at first? There are a number of people I've heard saying, well, this is bad, obviously, but this country is so, it's crashing in so many ways. There surely isn't the kind of infrastructure to enforce any of this stuff. I mean, who's going to be, coming? I mean, there are lots of people who homeschool now. Where is the manpower, the personnel, the money going to come from to actually monitor this? And how would the schools cope if everyone who homeschools has to send their kids to schools which are already many, as you say, many are really struggling anyway, in terrible ways? I mean, that's to understate the difficulties that many schools face at the moment. So I guess those are my 2 questions, really. Is it going to go through in this way? Is it going to be that bad? Is there any hope for parents? And do you have any other suggestions about what homeschoolers could actually do?
Well, it is going to go through because it's a government-supported bill, so the Labour MPs are going to be whipped to vote for it. I mean, you saw a couple of weeks ago the Conservative Party tried to attach an amendment to this to have an inquiry into grooming gangs because that's about children's well-being, but all the Labour MPs voted against it because they didn't want that to be in this children's well-being and schools bill because they'd have had to then vote for the grooming gangs inquiry. So they're whipped to support this bill as the government wants it to be. So it will go through. Obviously, if the Heritage Party got in the next election, we would repeal it immediately. It's one of the first things we would do. There's many things that need to be done in the first 10 days of a government. But, so politically, the only way to get rid of this really is to vote for a party like us to get into power, and then we can end this. It'll do 3 or 4 years of damage or till the next election, but we can get rid of this if everyone acts as one and does that. But it's going to be implemented by the local councils. So obviously the MPs are not going to be implementing this themselves, but they put a requirement on local councils to do this, to keep the register, to do the inspections, to make judgments about individual parents and individual home education scenarios, and so they have a lot of people that can go and do that in their local education departments. I mean, every district, every county and borough has a local education authority, so that's where the people are that can go around and monitor this and do the inspections. And they're not going to be able to do everyone at the same time, but there are a lot of people that can do that, and they are acting in a horrendous manner. Wherever someone is resistant to the transgender ideology, for example, they try and remove children from parents sometimes, and they say that that they're not being safeguarded because the parents are passing down traditional family values. We know this happens already, so that's where it's going to actually happen. Again, not every local council is going to do this, and we need to act politically at a local level as well. There are, of course, elections coming up in May for some local counties and some local boroughs and districts. So again, I'd make the same appeal. Please stand to be a candidate. If you're concerned about this, don't just say you're concerned and talk about it. Stand to be a councillor. Become a councillor. Then you are making the decisions and you have the power over what people employed in your council do. And if you don't want this and you are a majority on the council, you can stop your local council from implementing this and attacking homeschooling. But it needs Christians to rise up and say, we're going to get involved in politics, because it's not just about, having discussions in the chamber. It's about making real difference to how policies affect our children and our families and our localities. So that's what we need to do on a local level as well as a national level.
Yeah, and what kind of people can become councillors, David? For people who might be interested in what you're saying and don't know anything about it, what kind of people become councillors?
Well, I have a number of candidates who are going to stand for the Heritage Party. There's some people who've been involved in politics for a long time, and there's some people who've never been in politics at all ever before, and they're new, and they just think the country is so bad. I need to do something now. I need, I had a chat to a chap up north last week, and he's just I've got to do something now. I've got to get off my backside and act. The time to just talk about things is over. He wants to get involved, so that's fantastic. But we have people who've been to university. We have people who are in manual work. For every kind of area in life. From lorry drivers to solicitors. All kinds of people and everything in between.
Mm.
So there's no particular background and that you have to get involved in politics. Well, I think that's because we're a startup challenger party. I'm not interested in whether someone's been to the right school and the right university and the right chambers to become a candidate. I'm not. We're just a mix of ordinary people, men and women. A lot of Christians, other people who are socially conservative, who aren't Christians. Even got a couple of Muslim people who stand. It's funny. Some of the Muslims they really like the Christian principles when they're actually explained properly. I had one guy the other day. He said, "This is the most Islamic party there is." I'm not sure if I agree with that, but from his point of view, he loves. This is not the principles we have. Christian principles are very good for all people of faith, and the country as a whole. So, everyone can get involved. If you just got a desire to make the country better and to restore our nation.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, David. I mean, it is the children's wellbeing school bills. I have to say, it has an ominous feeling about it, and I think that this is a significant step. It's another. I mean, it's alongside. There have been many, obviously, but recently the assisted dying bill and this. I think this is a significant step in the de-Christianization of our country, the further de-Christianization of our country, and the attack on children, the focus on children is very pernicious. It reminds me of what I've read about socialist Russia. Everything is about the indoctrination of children and removing parents' right to choose how they educate their children is a huge step in that. It's essentially in the actual the government. On the government website, it says something like, parents, we acknowledge that parents should play a part in deciding how their children are educated. Now, that's not been the understanding in this nation, that we play a part in deciding. It's that we do decide, and that if we want to send our children to a school, that's our decision. And if we don't want to send our children to a school, that's also our decision. It's not the decision of the state. Fundamentally, it's either the parents' decision or it's the decision of the state, and that is the thing that's going to change as a result of this schools bill. It is going to become the decision of the state where and how your children are educated, and that is very ominous, in my opinion.
This is how they think. This is how
Yeah.
communists and Marxists think.
Yeah.
They don't want the family. They don't believe in the family. In fact, they want to destroy the family. I mean, that's one of three things in the Communist Manifesto that is set out that need to be destroyed: the nation, the family, and private property, and also underneath that, Christianity.
Yeah, religion.
Those are four things essentially that Marxists want to destroy. So they actually genuinely believe that children belong to the state.
Yeah.
The same as they believe that property belongs to the state, which is why, we'll talk about this later. There's the attack on private property at the same time as there's now an attack on families and a power grab over children.
Yeah.
So that they don't believe their core that the parents and families have anything to do with bringing up children. They think the state says what happens and everyone needs to fall in line with them rather than the other way round. And the correct way of thinking is that the people who are elected by us are there to serve us. They serve us, not the other way round. But they actually believe that they have the power and we are subservient to them. But we need to change that, because if we don't, and we just sit back passively, well, we're going to get what they give us. But I'm not willing to lay back and let that happen.
Yes, I quite agree. Let's talk then about this other bill. So this is a climate and nature bill. I have to say that I don't know very much about this apart from what I've heard. So tell us about the climate and nature bill.
Yeah, I think the reason why people don't know as much about this is because the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill is a government bill introduced by the government. This is a private members bill, so it was introduced three times, or in the past, in previous parliaments. Once by a Green, and then by a Labour person. This time in this parliament, back in October 2024, it was introduced by a Lib Dem. So they're all working together there, and there's a lot of Tories that support it as well. The climate and nature bill is essentially a climate alarmist dream. I mean, it's been written by the most extreme of eco warriors and eco loons that you can imagine. So it is basically Agenda 2030 wrapped up in legal legislation speak in order to become a parliamentary bill. I mean, it's not very long, to be honest. It's only got about 8 sections, so you can read it fairly quickly. A lot of other bills have got like 300 sections in them. But essentially, the climate and nature bill, as well as affirming what isn't true, but the government and a lot of local councils have declared there's a climate emergency. So we need to change the way we live in order to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, to meet the IPCC's target of limiting global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees. I mean, this is all nonsense because carbon dioxide is not harmful. But as well as that, they're also now declaring a nature emergency. So saying that there's a loss of biodiversity. So we need to change our lives and do all kinds of things in order to stop harming nature. Now, I do agree that there's a lot of things that happen that do harm nature. We're ripping up the rainforests in Congo to mine cobalt for electric vehicles. We're putting wind turbines and solar panels all over prime agricultural land. But that's not the kind of things that they're targeting. They actually are saying that they want to rewild up to 30%, or actually at least 30% of all land, all inland waterways, all offshore, marine areas have got to be rewilded where humans will not go and not, just never interact with them, to give that back to nature. Now, I totally agree. If you've got a country like Congo or Brazil, where there's a lot of more than 30% is natural, we need to preserve those areas and make sure what's there doesn't get destroyed. And, things that have been taken, we get them back to restore them. But in a country like the UK, where we've got 80% plus of our land area is agriculture, and they're going to say, well, we need to give 30% of our agricultural land back to rewilding. That's going to decimate our whole farming and agriculture sector, and it's completely balmy. It doesn't make any sense, especially when as well they're putting solar panels all over agricultural land, and they're building massive housing developments on green land as well. So it actually says on the nature thing that they need to meet the targets set out in something I'd never heard of before until I started looking into it, which is the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And if you look at this, it's absolutely mad, because it starts talking about Mother Earth and looking after Mother Earth and the rights of Mother Earth. And so this is a piece of legislation that requires the UK government to adhere to the targets in Agenda 2030, the IPCC's reports on climate change, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which talks about the rights of Mother Earth. And that's going to be part, if it goes through, that will become UK law. It's absolutely balmy, to be honest. But I hope this has got less chance of getting through than the other one, because it's a private members bill. There are a lot of people who are MPs who are climate alarmists who will just go and support this anyway, because they've not thought about it and they think it's a nice idea. But if they actually realize what this actually sets out, and one of the things which, again, is very, very, economically destructive, is that it will require the government to um, pursue total decarbonization. So we will have to dismantle all of our carbon-based energy infrastructure, which has been happening anyway.
Mm,
The fake Conservative Party has actually literally blown up coal power stations, and that's continued under Labour. But it also will require the government to end imports
mm,
of any carbon-based fuels which we rely on because we're destroying our own domestic carbon-based energy infrastructure. That's bad enough. But then on top of it, it will say we're not allowed any imports. We're only
mm,
going to be allowed to rely on solar and wind power for
mm,
all of our energy. Well, the lights are going to go off very quickly, and essentially we will end up, the economy will be over.
mm.
The economy will crash
Yeah.
just like just like that. Imagine we don't have any coal, any gas. We're not allowed to import gas anymore from Norway or Russia. We're not allowed to take any out of the North Sea ourselves.
Mm,
That's the end.
mm.
We're going to be back in the Stone Age,
Yeah.
and this is what this bill wants to do. So hopefully, a majority of people, even Labour MPs up in the north in the Red Wall, who's some of them are a little bit more sensible because their constituents are forcing them to be. Hopefully, this bill will fall.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things I just want to ask you, just follow up there. This is clearly, if it goes through, it would be an attack on farmers. So what about the interplay between that and the inheritance tax on farmers? Do you see that as something, as part of a kind of coordinated attack on farmers? And how does it, you mentioned earlier, Agenda 2030, and you've got your posters in the background as well. Tell us a little bit about that as well and how that plays into all of this.
Yeah, I mean, this is just another hammer in the nail in the, sorry, a nail being hammered into the coffin of agriculture. They
Mm,
want to destroy agriculture, as it is. The people that are pushing Agenda 2030, I mean, it's all about sustainability and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals written by the United Nations. I mean, people say that's a conspiracy theory, but it's on the UN's website and it has been for many, many years. And you can see them and you can see what they all are. And they're written in a way that sounds nice, but essentially you look after underneath it and you look at the statements that people have made in organizations like the World Economic Forum, who completely support Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. They want to end dairy farming, cattle farming, end the keeping of animals essentially, and transition to lab meat and artificial proteins and these kind of things. And there's a lot of money being invested into these kind of things. Insects, cricket farms, mealworms, horrible things. I don't like to think about them, but you've got people actually trying to make new industries out of this and then put them in the food chain for humans.
mm,
But they want to get rid of traditional farming because they don't like that. Cover the farmland over with solar and wind turbines, and then get our food produced in big high-rise, factories where we were essentially creating Frankenfoods. It's a little bit like Soylent Green.
mm,
So that's the vision for the future of food, and that's just one thing. The
mm,
other thing is, of course, ending travel. As we know it, so people won't have private cars. They're making it more and more difficult these days for people to own a car and drive a car. It's becoming more expensive. There's 15-minute cities going in the UK and many, many different places that mean you get charged for going into certain areas, and what
mm,
they call clean air zones, which is another method of charging you if you drive through a city which has got one. But ultimately, they want everyone to be doing what they call active travel, which
mm.
sounds nice on the surface, but that's basically you walk and you cycle or you take public transport, but you don't have your own personal vehicle.
Yeah.
They won't exist anymore in the vision of the future.
Mm,
So it's really an attack on liberty
mm,
as a whole, and it will destroy the free market economy that we've got, and has been of a benefit to us and everyone for hundreds of years.
mm. Yeah, and I suppose the sort of ideological underpinning is it's a kind of it's a commitment to a sort of global communist superstate, isn't it? I think that's it's like the socialist agenda for a nation, but just kind of writ large across the world, essentially.
Yeah, well, what they talk about more, we talk about global government and one world government, and that's, that's often mentioned. But what they are bringing in is not global government, but global governance,
Mm,
global to local governance.
mm,
So some of the structures that we've got will be left in place, like local councils and so on. Although that's being changed, and that's another big thing that is a step on the way, is what they call the devolution agenda for England. But they will put their own people in local governance positions in order to impose the targets of Agenda 2030 and the targets of this climate and nature bill and so on at a local level. So that's what is being put in place at the moment.
yeah. Yes, well, thank you for that. David, I should let you go soon, but just before we finish up, can you is there anything else that's on your mind that you'd like to share with our listeners? And also tell us where we can find you. And you were saying earlier about getting involved. Where do people go if they want to get involved?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Well, our heritage, our website is heritageparty.org. And if you go there, you can read our manifesto and you can join as a member. It's only £25 a year to join, which is good for a political party. And then if you're a member, you can then also apply to be a candidate as well. And so if you're in one of the areas, particularly this year, where there are county council elections or local elections, please come and join us and get involved and stand as a councillor and take action to push back against all of these agendas, the woke agenda, the climate agenda, and particularly, as I was a teacher for a very long time, and I feel very strongly about this, is protecting our children
Mm,
from these things and people who want to harm our children, particularly in schools with all this sexuality education. We need to push back against this, and we need to make sure that we're protected and we can restore our nation. So again, thanks for giving me a chance to set that out and to appeal to people to get involved in politics. And you can get involved if you've never ever been involved before. One thing we haven't really covered to a large extent in our conversation is the devolution. I just mentioned it in the
mm,
last bit, but what's happening at the moment, you may have heard that they're trying to cancel some of the county council elections this year, and the reason is that Angela Rayner, that tower of intelligence, who is now the deputy prime minister, is trying to change the way that local government operates, from having counties and districts where we elect councillors to putting in regional mayors and metro mayors everywhere. Now, I think everyone's heard of Sadiq Khan, who
mm,
is the mayor of London, who is a complete disaster.
mm,
I don't think the mayor of London works for London, because they do everything that's wrong. But what the Labour government wants to do is impose mayors everywhere. So you'll have a mayor of Surrey, a mayor of Sussex, a mayor of Devon, a mayor of Norfolk, a mayor of Lancashire.
mm,
You've already got a Greater Manchester mayor, but they want a mayor in every county that is, elected maybe once every 4 or 5 years. But it's very, very hard to stand in those elections because the fee to stand is so high.
mm.
I mean, there's a deposit for the London mayor of £10,000.
Oh, man.
So, for Parliament, it costs £500 deposit to stand. For local elections, it's free.
Mm,
There's no deposit. So anyone can stand for a local election without paying anything.
mm,
Parliament 500. But these mayors, these metro mayors and regional mayors that they want to impose everywhere, it's going to cost £5,000 or £10,000 to
mm,
stand to be a regional mayor.
mm,
And most people aren't going to be able to afford it. I mean, at the moment, we certainly can't afford it as
mm,
as a smaller challenger party. So the only parties that are going to be able to afford it are Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, Green, which then embeds the uniparty even more in these positions, which means that they will then continue the agenda.
mm,
So I completely oppose these plans. And if you oppose them too, and you don't want a Sadiq Khan in every county in England, now's the time to get involved in politics and stand for your local councils. Because if you become the councillors, you can oppose these plans, and you can keep a semblance of democracy at local level, which at least gives you the chance of getting in and stopping these harmful agendas from affecting us and affecting our children.
David, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time, and I wish you all the best with what you're doing.
Thanks, Jamie. Great to join you.
God bless. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that interview, if that is the right word, with David. I have to say, it is concerning when you hear about these sort of things that are going on in the world. So I thought I'd just share a little psalm and a prayer as we finish the podcast episode today. And I particularly invite you to join with me in this time of prayer if you are feeling disturbed or concerned by what David said. Now, in ending the episode with prayer and saying these things, I'm not suggesting that a life of quietistic piety is the way of dealing with these problems. I do agree with David that there is a calling upon us as Christians to advocate in the public square, some more explicitly than others. The right thing to do is to pray and to act as God calls us to act. So both of these things come together. But when we act, we have to try and ensure that that action comes out of a life of prayer, not from a place of anxiety, not from a place of anger and rage, but from a quiet, godly, holy disposition. After we spent time listening to the Lord, asking for him to make it clear to us what he's calling us to do in our lives. So I invite you to consider those things as I read this psalm now. And I invite you to consider what the Lord might be calling you to do as a response. It might just be to continue with what you're doing already in your life. It might be to get involved with the Heritage Party or to do something else in the public square. But ask the Lord what he's calling you to do. And what I'll do is I'm going to read Psalm 16, which is one of my favorite Psalms, and this is from the Book of Common Prayer. And then I'm going to pray the collect for the first Sunday after Advent, which is also from the Book of Common Prayer. And it's one of those, well, they're all great collects, but I particularly like this collect because it asks that God would help us to perceive and know the things that we ought to do. A lot of the time, it's clear what we ought to do every day we wake up. We know what we're doing with the day. We know what we're doing with our life in general. But it's always good to ask the Lord, what are you calling me to do now and at this time? What are you calling me to do in response? And sometimes when our hearts are disturbed by something, when our hearts are moved, when our emotions are stirred up, that's a great prayer to pray. Lord, what are you asking me to do as a result of this thing that's come into my life, that's come into my world? So let's pray the psalm and let's pray the collect together to finish. Psalm 16. Preserve me, O God, for in thee have I put my trust. O my soul, thou hast said unto the Lord, thou art my God, my goods are nothing unto thee. All my delight is upon the saints that are in the earth, and upon such as excel in virtue. But they that run after another God shall have great trouble. Their drink offerings of blood will I not offer, neither make mention of their name within my lips. The Lord himself is the portion of mine inheritance and my cup. Thou shalt maintain my lot. The lot is fallen unto me in a fair ground, yea, I have a goodly heritage. I will thank the Lord for giving me warning. My reins also chasten me in the night season. They have set God always before me. For he is on my right hand, therefore I shall not fall. Wherefore my heart was glad, and my glory rejoiced. My flesh also shall rest in hope. For why? Thou shalt not leave my soul in hell, neither shalt thou suffer thy Holy One to see corruption. Thou shalt show me the path of life. In thy presence is the fullness of joy, and at thy right hand there is pleasure for evermore. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. We bring before the Lord our concerns, our fears, for our nation and our world, for our families and our children, and ask that he has mercy upon us, and ask that he delivers us from all our fears and from all assaults of our enemies. We commend ourselves unto God now. Let us pray. O Lord, we beseech thee mercifully to receive the prayers of thy people which call upon thee, and grant that they may both perceive and know what things they ought to do, and also may have grace and power faithfully to fulfill the same. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Oaks, thanks for listening to this podcast all the way to the end. Really, really appreciate it. Just to say that if you appreciate what I'm trying to do with this podcast, what we're doing, me, Daniel, and Tom, and others who are involved with this podcast, please do consider supporting the podcast financially. Be specific about that. It's great that you listen in, and if you listen in, please share this. If you're watching the video now, just share it on your social media or share it with a friend. Or if you are listening on podcast, please share it on X or on your social media. Please subscribe to us as well. All of these things really, really important. But also please support us financially. Now, it's very, very, very low bar to support us financially. All you need to do is go onto our website at reverendpod.com and scroll down slightly and click on the red button which says Patreon. If you become a patron of the show, you can do that by paying a monthly fee of £1.50 in the UK plus sorry, I should say that again, £1.50 plus VAT in the UK. So VAT is 20%. So it's a very, very low, it's under £2 to support us in this podcast and to keep us online, keep us on the air. We are on our audio podcast. We are frequently the most downloaded Christian podcast in the UK. So you are directly contributing to us having a voice to Christians and other people all around the nations of England and also globally as well. So please do consider supporting us. All you need to do is go to our website, reverendpod.com, and click on that red button, and you can support us. You also get a bonus audio podcast every week where I chew the fat with Tom and Daniel about various different things. Sometimes that's a bit of fun, sometimes it's a bit more serious, but often it's just material that wouldn't be appropriate for one reason or another to put on the main weekly podcast. I also release the episodes early to patrons, just so they can have them straight away. What do we do with the money? Some of the money goes on the running of the show. It does cost a bit of money to produce the podcast, but a lot of it goes to me. I actually rely upon the money I make from this podcast and through my writing to live. I'm a vicar, but I'm not paid by the church. I live in a church house, but I don't get an income from a church. So I rely on that, and it helps me and my family to live. So you are actually directly contributing to my well-being, my family's well-being. So really appreciate that if you can do it. And I would hope that most people who listen to this podcast and enjoy it can afford less than £2 a month. If you want to give more, of course you can. So please do. But that's what I ask you. If you listen to this podcast and you like it, please do today, even now, just go to the website and become a Patreon and join us in that way. Another notice, which I actually forgot to, I'll probably be talking about this a lot more, I'm sure, but I should say is my book is available for pre-order. My book is called The Great Return: Why Only a Restoration of Christianity Can Save Western Civilization. And you'll see from the title that my book is very much in line with the kind of thing that David is talking about. I too believe that only a widespread return to Christianity, not only in the individual sphere, but in the public sphere, is the way to turn things around. I just can't see things in any other way. And in my book, I talk about that from the perspective of the history of ideas. So I've got chapters on history, I've got chapters on science and religion and why science can't replace religion. And I've also got chapters on ethics and I try and explain, in my view, why things are going in the way that they are. And it very much is as a result of the loss of our Christian foundation, not just in terms of people being actively Christian and laws reflecting Christianity, but in terms of what people actually believe about the nature of reality, and the way that that works its way out eventually and inevitably in a post-Christian nation, which is what we're seeing at the moment. So please do pre-order my book as well. Go on to Amazon. I'm afraid if you don't like Amazon, I'm afraid it's only available for pre-order on Amazon at the moment. It's not my decision, well, my publisher, I suppose. But go on to Amazon, The Great Return, Jamie Franklin. I'll put a link under this podcast. I'll also put a link to support us, and I'll put a link if you would like to look at David's website with the potential of becoming a member of the Heritage Party as well. I'll finish up there. Thanks everyone for listening. Please do those things. Send me an email, reverendpod@gmail.com, and just leave your comments. As always, share on social media, and please accept my thanks for listening to the podcast. And until next time, keep watch and keep the faith. Bye for now.